at just under T-minus 13 minutes. Let's take a closer look at the Falcon Heavy vehicle that you see there on your screen. Falcon Heavy is essentially 3 Falcon 9 rockets strapped together, which means it can carry much larger payloads, not only to Earth orbit, but to the Moon and Mars as well. Now, like Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy is a 2-stage launch vehicle. Now, the big difference is that Falcon Heavy first stage is comprised of 3 cores, whereas Falcon 9 only has 1. Falcon Heavy has 28 engines in total. Each of these cores has 9 M1D engines, making for a total of 27 engines across all 3 boosters, which you can see there on your screen. The 28th engine is a Merlin vacuum engine on the 2nd stage and will power the payload to its final targeted orbit. Now, altogether, the Merlin 1D engines at the base of Falcon Heavy produce 5 million pounds of thrust. That's equal to 18 747s at takeoff. Now, in fact, the engines produce so much power that we don't run them at full thrust all at once until after liftoff. About 2.5 minutes into flight, the 2 side boosters will separate from the center core and come back down to Earth for simultaneous landings at Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2, which you can see there on your screen. If successfully recovered, these side boosters will be refurbished and used in a future national security space launch. Now, upon side booster separation, the center core will keep firing for about 90 seconds before shutting down its engines and then perform a standard stage separation from the 2nd stage. We will not be attempting to land our center core today as the mission requires more performance. Now, this means that in order to get our payload to where it needs to go for today's mission, the center core will burn the fuel that we would typically use for recovery. And for those of you looking closely, that is why you don't see any landing legs or grid fins on the center core. Now moving towards the top of the vehicle, once the 1st and 2nd stage separate, the 2nd stage will propel our payload to its intended orbit. At our customer's request, we will not be showing views of stage 2, so immediately after the Merlin vacuum engine on the 2nd stage fires up, we'll be directing all of our attention to the landing of our side boosters. Now, above the 2nd stage is where our payload is safely enclosed inside of the fairing. That's at the very top of the rocket there on your screen. The fairing protects the payload from aerothermal loads, heating, and contamination during ascent. Now, once we reach the vacuum of space, we will jettison the fairing as the 2nd stage continues on its journey to orbit, and we will be attempting to recover the fairing halves today with our recovery vessel, Bob. Now, as I mentioned earlier, today's launch, USSF-67, is a national security space launch mission for the United States Space Force. Now, let's learn a bit more from our customer about today's mission.
We depend on space every day to support our way of life, our supply chain, financial systems, weather tracking, and power grids, as well as air, land, and maritime infrastructure. Our U.S. military is the strongest and best equipped force in the world. In the heavily contested space domain, Space Systems Command leads a team of roughly 15,000 guardians, airmen, civilians, and contractors. Headquartered in El Segundo, California, our unbeatable team operates from multiple locations across the U.S. and includes 2 space launch deltas, SLD-45 at Patrick Space Force Base and SLD-30 at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Through unity of effort across the space acquisition enterprise, Space Systems Command delivers to warfighters integrated and resilient space capabilities through 5 program executive offices. Assured access to space, procures launch services and delivers on-orbit capabilities faster and more frequently than ever before, while sustaining ranges for the United States Space Force and commercial partners. Battle Management Command, Control, and Communication delivers tactical and operational command and control capabilities to warfighters, facilitating timely and quality battle space decisions for the joint all-domain fight. Space Domain Awareness and Combat Power maximizes the full characterization of space using a wide range of multi-domain assets by rapidly detecting potential and real threats to our nation and allies, which enables decisive action in the space domain. Communications and positioning, navigation and timing ensures the delivery of resilient capabilities across the acquisition lifecycle, from prototypes to systems on the production line to systems our warfighters have been operating for years. Space sensing delivers space-based battle space awareness through missile warning, tracking, environmental monitoring, and tactical intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Our adversaries fully intend to disrupt, degrade, and destroy the U.S. and our allies' ability to access and operate in space. Not on our watch. Space Systems Command is focused on creating and sustaining resilient lethality in space through systems integration, unity of effort, and digital engineering ecosystems. At Space Systems Command, space starts here.
At T-minus 6 minutes and 45 seconds, the SpaceX team continues to count down for launch of our 4th operational Falcon Heavy flight, and all systems are go. Following a successful static fire this past Tuesday, Falcon Heavy rolled out to the pad with the payload at 5:45 a.m. and went vertical about 4.5 hours later. Now, before we began the webcast, the SpaceX launch director...
Booster RP1 load is complete.
The SpaceX launch director pulled the members of the launch team and got a go for propellant loading and launch. Now, we're currently loading propellant on all 3 first stage boosters as well as the second stage. Now, you may be able to hear the live rocket sounds from our launch pad. The pops and hissing sounds that you hear are from propellant loading, as well as the launch mount and strong back that the propellant is going through. Falcon Heavy uses 2 propellants, a refined form of kerosene called RP1, or Rocket Propellant 1, as a fuel, and LOX, or liquid oxygen, as an oxidizer. Now, an oxidizer is a type of chemical that a fuel requires in order to burn. The liquid oxygen is chilled below its boiling point so that it has a much greater amount of mass per volume. So basically, we can load more of it into the vehicle. Our fuel is RP1, essentially a purified kerosene. It is safe, easily available, and has a lot of history. And in fact, the Saturn V first stage flown from this very pad on the moon missions also used liquid oxygen and kerosene. And in addition to these 2 propellants, we also use the chemical TTEB, or triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane, as an ignition source. The combustion of RP1 and liquid oxygen is what makes the rocket go, and it's the TTEB that sets the match to the propellant mix. Now, next up, the trusted structure next to the vehicle.
Tanks are pressing for a strong back retract.
And there's that call out just in time. The structure next to the vehicle is called the strong back, or the TE. And in preparation for retraction, the clamp arms will begin to open. There's clamp arms just there that you can see on your screen below the fairing. Those will begin to open up, and once they are fully open...
Back retract in progress.
Once they're fully open, then the TE, or the transporter erector, can begin to retract away from the vehicle, and we did hear that call out that the TE retraction process has begun. Now, as I mentioned earlier, today's launch marks our 2nd Falcon Heavy flight in just 11 weeks. And for those of you following along, a lot will happen in the first 4 minutes of flight. And there you can see on your screen that the clamp arms have begun to open. Once those are fully open, the TE can begin to retract away from the vehicle. Now again, a lot will happen in the first 4 minutes of flight. First, we will light the 2 side boosters, followed by...
booster LOX load is complete.
Followed by the center core. And about 40 seconds after liftoff, we will decrease power on the 2 side boosters to prepare for max Q, after which Falcon Heavy will throttle back up to full power on the side boosters. Now, 2 minutes into flight, we will...
booster LOX load is complete.
2 minutes into flight, we will again reduce thrust on the 2 side boosters, this time to decrease forces on the rocket structure, as the vehicle is now much lighter, but thrust is constant. Now, 2.5 minutes into flight, we will fully turn off the side boosters with booster engine cutoff, or what we call BECO. The pneumatic separation
Center
system
core LOX load complete.
getting good callouts. I'm going to pause for each one of those. The pneumatic separation system on the center core then unlocks the 2 side boosters and pushes them away. Now, once we are clear of the side boosters, the center core throttles up to full power until the center core shuts down with main engine cutoff, or what we call MECO, and then separates from the second stage around the 4-minute mark. And as a reminder, we will not be attempting to recover the center core today, as the mission requires more performance. Now, for those of you looking closely, this is why you don't see any landing legs or grid fins on the center core. And from this point on, very similar to a Falcon 9 mission, the side boosters will be making their way back down to Earth for recovery. The fairing will separate, and the second stage will take the USSF-67 payload out into space. Now, as a reminder, at the request of our customer, we will not be showing views of the payload, so we will be ending the webcast just after our side boosters.
Stage 2 lock load complete.
Just after our side boosters make their way back down to land on landing zone 1 and landing zone 2, a little after the T+8 minute mark into flight. And as we've mentioned before, launch is hard, and Falcon Heavy is no exception. We are essentially counting down 3 rockets simultaneously, so our team is going to be conservative in case anything pops up in the last couple minutes of the countdown. Now, if for some reason we don't launch today, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow at the same time. And we did also hear those callouts that propellant loading is now complete on Falcon Heavy.
Burn gas closeouts.
So we are now going to vent out the liquid oxygen line on the transporter erector. Next up will be Falcon Heavy in startup, and that will be at the T-1 minute mark. That's where the internal flight computers take over the launch countdown.
Falcon Heavy is in startup.
And great news, Falcon Heavy now in startup. We're now just waiting for the final call from the launch director.
This is the mission director. Go for launch.
And excellent news, all systems are go for launch of Falcon Heavy with USSF-67.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine full power. And liftoff of USSF-67. Go Falcon Heavy. Go Space Force. Booster chamber pressures are nominal.
T+40 seconds into flight under the power of 5 million pounds of thrust.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Falcon Heavy is headed to space. Now, we did throttle down the engines around the T+40 second
Vehicle
mark
supersonic.
in preparation for max Q.
Max Q.
And great call out there that we have passed through max Q. That's the largest mechanical stress on the vehicle on ascent. And incredible, incredible views there on your screen. Falcon Heavy in flight. Now, next events coming up will be booster engine cutoff, or BECO, followed by separation of the side boosters, and followed by their side booster boost back burns. And then will be center core main engine cutoff, or what we call MECO. Again, those events coming up here just under a minute away. That will be BECO. That's where the side boosters engines will shut down. The center core will push those side boosters away from the vehicle. then those two side boosters can begin to make their way back down to Earth with their boost back burns. And on your right-hand screen, you could see the views from each of those side boosters. Really incredible views here. Again, we will have BECO, side booster, boost back burn, followed by main engine cutoff of the center core here in just a few seconds.
Side booster separation.
Side core booster startup.
Incredible views. We just had BECO and separation of the side boosters, and you can see on your left-hand screen that the side boosters have lit back up. They are now in their boost back burn, making their way back down to Earth. Now, those side boosters are returning to Florida under the power of 3 engines. That's 3 of the 9 M1D engines. So next up will be the conclusion. Next up will be the conclusion of those side booster boost back burns, followed by MECO on the center core, as well as stage separation of the center core and the second stage, and then SES-1 or second stage engine start 1. Now, as I mentioned previously, per the request of our customer, we won't be showing second stage views after SES-1. And additionally, our center core or stage 1 is expendable today, so we will not be attempting to recover that vehicle, but we should have some great views like we are seeing right now.
Side core boost back shut down.
We should have some great views of those side boosters touching down for landing.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC startup.
And excellent views. We had the
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
We did have the shutdown of the boost back burn. We did have the shutdown of the boost back burns on the side boosters, as well as MECO on that center core and stage separation. We are waiting for confirmation of a call out of the fairing separation.
All vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
So currently stage 2 is still making its way to its targeted drop-off orbit, while the side boosters are making their way back down to land. Again, these side boosters have another burn coming up. That will be the entry burn. That will be 3 of 9 M1D engines reigniting. That helps to slow the boosters down in preparation or as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. We got some views here from those side boosters there on your screen. Now, at the time of separation, the side boosters were traveling slow enough to turn around and make their way back to land, to our side-by-side landing pads. If we have successful landings today, we'll mark the 163rd and 164th landing of an orbital class rocket. As I mentioned earlier, the center core will be expendable, and we are not attempting to recover it today.
Side core entry burn startup.
And there you can see on your screen, the entry burns for these side boosters have begun. They're just about 12 seconds long.
Side core entry burn
PY FTS
shutdown.
has saved, and NY FTS has saved.
And the entry burns for both side boosters have now concluded. Now next up will be the final burn for each of these side boosters. That is the landing burn. It is just a single engine burn, the center E9 engine. Each one of these M1D engines have about 190,000 pounds of thrust. So that is enough to slow the vehicle down just in time for landing. And you could see the coast of Florida in the background.
Side boosters are transonic.
Now that landing burn coming up here in just about 20 seconds or so. Landing burn will last about 20 seconds long. Again, we are scheduled to land on landing zone 1 and landing
Booster
zone 2.
landing burn.
And there are those landing burns have begun on the side boosters. So let's watch as they touch down.
Stage 2 is on terminal guidance. Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Booster landing leg deployed.
And what an incredible sight to see as we watch the side boosters touch down for landing. That confirms successful landing of both Falcon Heavy side boosters on landing zone 1 and landing zone 2. Now with these two side boosters, this marks the 163rd and 164th overall successful landing of an orbital class rocket. It's also the 25th landing on landing zone 1 and the 6th landing on landing zone 2. And with successful confirmation of our side boosters landing, that will bring today's webcast to a close.
Insertion.
Now, we'd like to thank the United States Space Force for entrusting us with today's mission. Thank you to the Range and the Federal Aviation Administration for licensing today's launch. And we'd like to thank all of you, our viewers, for tuning in. Now, if you're interested, head over to our website and social media platforms for updates on our next missions and milestones. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you again soon.